Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, hang on real quick, actually. I'm still on Zoom from our morning call. I'm going to turn this off. Okay. Don't convert this video. All right, so the Gilded Age, politics and society. We're going to talk a little bit about farmers today, this Granger movement, these farmers' alliances that I keep alluding to, how they are pushing for political power, and also a little bit about what populism is. It's so important to understand these ideas of populism because we are really living right now in 2021 in this populist in the midst of a populist movement, really. And populism knows no party, kind of like progressives, right? That we'll be talking about. You can be Republican or Democrat during the progressive era. And today, especially also when we're talking about populism, you can be a populist Republican, you can be a populist Democrat. Populism really knows no party. For example, I feel pretty comfortable saying that Donald Trump is a populist. But also Bernie Sanders is a populist. So, what does that look like? It's just this idea that you have a broad base of appeal, that you are attempting to appeal to, in the case of the populists of this time period that we're talking about in the Gilded Age, farmers out west, but also industrial workers out east. You're appealing to this common man. Andrew Jackson is a populist. This idea that we, the worker, we, the common man, we, the ordinary person in this country, have gotten a raw deal. And if we just band together the different types of common workers, common men that we are, then we can affect real change, drain the swamp, so to speak, get the foxes out of the hen house, right? Those traditional politicians. A lot of the rhetoric you see it's the same, just labeled as something different, right? So let's talk about the Grange and the farmer alliances. So why did farmers struggle to be successful? Oh, for so many reasons. And let's think back to that little homesteader simulation that we did with the farming in Platte on the Platte River in Nebraska in 1885, 86, 87, 88, and 89. Well, why did they struggle to be successful? Think about why you may have struggled to be successful in that game. There are low prices for crops, and that's just the reality of it. And when we are going through a time where, let's say, corn is super plentiful, then you're flooding the market with corn, and then that drops the price for corn. So just when you think you have a handle on what environment or what crops your environment is going to support, there's a drought and you have an off season. So think about crops, but also think about supply and demand. The more supply there is of something, then the less expensive it's going to be. So if you plant too much one year, you're going to lose money because you're not going to recoup the money that you put into it. And then that's all there is to it. So low prices for crops, and we'll have to talk about what the government is going to do about that in terms of subsidies. Also a high cost for transportation. Railroad companies were notorious during this time period. They would charge more for industrial goods than they would for farm products. You are seeing increasing debt. Think about that simulation, how you kept losing money. If you were going to get to the point where you were at zero, where you didn't have the $500 to subtract out of your profits in order to live, you're going to have to take out a loan. You're going to have to, for example, mortgage your house. Now remember, your homestead is purchased, so to speak, under that Homesteader Act of 1862, right? That's yours to keep as long as you work the land for 3 years. Your farm is. Not necessarily the home that you build there, but your farm. Well, if you don't have enough money to live, you may go to a bank and borrow money against the worth of your land. And that's what a mortgage is. And so then all of a sudden now you have a house note, you have a mortgage note that you have to continue to pay down. Farmers also don't have any political influence. They have no political representation. If you look at the big money in politics with these political machines, right, that benefits industrial workers. That benefits the urban poor, right? Not the rural poor. So who's looking out for the farmer? I mean, not that anyone's really looking out for the urban poor, but who is looking out for the rural poor? Who is looking out for the farmer? And at this point in time, absolutely no one. Absolutely no one is. And yet, farmers do more than their fair share for our nation. I mentioned railroads being inconsistent with their rates, and even suppliers would raise their prices for farmers. So, the same thing that, same piece of steel that a factory would buy, if a farmer were to buy it, it would cost more. So, we're going to see a couple of different movements emerge, different groups emerge to try to help and capitalize on these struggles that farmers were facing. The first one we're going to talk about is the Grange. We can call the members Grangers. And then the second group that we'll talk about are these various farmer alliances. So, we'll start with the Grange. The leader of the Grange, the founder of the Grange, is Oliver H. Kelly. At its height, it has over 1 million members. They first attempt to organize politically in 1867. Their formal name is the National Grange of the Patrons of Husbandry. Animal husbandry is just, ranching, essentially. It's going to be composed of local networks and organizations. So a whole bunch of small groups of farmers come together to form the Grange. Their membership is going to really grow in response to the Depression of 1873. Anytime there is an economic panic or depression, it will hit farmers especially hard. Grangers during this time will gain control of a lot of legislatures in the Midwest. So they're going to have a lot of congressmen, local officials in the Midwest. And a lot of those states in particular will pass laws related to the control of railroad rates. So what happens? Well, over time, the economy starts to improve, and the Supreme Court and other lower courts begin to strike down laws related to the regulation of railroad rates. And so with those failures and the improvement of the economy, membership in the Grange starts to decline, and it will be replaced by some farmer alliances. And this is a really great image. It says gifts for the Grangers. It's showing, idyllic pictures of farmers in their daily life. As the Grange declined, farmers' alliances emerged. These are very loose organizations of farmers, for example, the Southern Alliance or a Northwestern Alliance. There were also farmer alliances specifically for African Americans in the South in particular, because they weren't welcomed into farmer alliances, oftentimes for white farmers. They worked together to form cooperatives. So co-ops, if you've ever heard of a co-op before, farmers could go to these stores and they could sort of get food and other supplies at a much lower price, or even promise to pay when their crop was harvested. They would work together to help each other out, to help each other cut expenses. Alliances soon became incredibly frustrated by what they saw a lack of progress. Political party. So they decide that they want to turn to politics, and perhaps they think that forming a political party would help bring their cause to a more national audience and hopefully have a greater impact. And that's going to lead to the creation of the People's Party. In 1892, this is the Populist Party. You can use those interchangeably. Leaders of various farmer alliances are going to meet in Omaha, Nebraska. You guys always say there's no cities in the Midwest, right? Or the West. Here we go, Omaha, Nebraska, to adopt a political party platform and form what they call the People's Party or the Populist Party. They're going to nominate James Weaver, and in the election of 1892, he will be the Green. Okay. He'll nominate him for president, and he makes enough. He takes enough vote to make a splash here in terms of how the third party does. But more importantly, over 1,500 populist candidates win seats in state legislatures. 3 become governors, 5 become senators, and 10 become congressmen. They will pull support from both Democratic and Republican parties, sort of further illustrating this idea that populism is not a Democrat or Republican concept. So this is really interesting what's happening here in terms of politics. And the Democrats and the Republicans are going to have to decide if they're interested in harnessing any of this populist energy and mainstreaming it into their own party. Um, in 2016, the Republican Party decided that it would harness that energy in the nomination of Trump, right? Bernie did not get the nomination. Populist ideas. What did they want? What were they asking for? We talked about them forming this party platform in Omaha. So what was it? Well, first of all, they're calling for a system of what they call sub-treasuries. These sub-treasuries would be government-controlled warehouses where farmers could go and literally deposit crops, and then farmers could borrow money at a set interest rate while waiting for the price of their crops to increase. So let's say you remember those investment returns in that farming simulation were like 0, 1, 2, 3. Let's say you had a 0 year. Well, you could just take your crop instead of selling it, right? Take your crop, borrow money, and then when you have a better year, you take that crop out of the warehouse, you sell it, you repay your interest loan. They would like to see the abolition of national banks. They think national banks are creating a deflated currency and making it more difficult for them to get loans. They would like to see an end of absentee land ownership, meaning some people would purchase this land, put up a fence, but they wouldn't farm it. And it meant that while that land was fenced off, the cattle next door couldn't graze on the land. So no more absentee land ownership. They wanted to see a direct election of U.S. senators, which might seem super weird to us. We might be thinking, of course, you directly elect your U.S. senators, but that actually took a constitutional amendment, which we'll discuss, the direct election of senators. But it used to be that the state legislature would vote on which senators to send to D.C. They wanted the government to regulate and own telegraphs, telephones, and railroads. They called for a system of government-run postal savings banks. So essentially, the post office would allow you to open a bank account. That is an idea that Bernie Sanders has been promoting for years and years, and is still promoting. Even other Democrats, like I'm thinking of Amy Klobuchar, I think she ran on postal savings banks or embraced the idea of a postal savings bank. There's like 6 million people or so in this country who are what they call unbanked right now, meaning they just keep their money. They don't have a bank. And a lot of times what they will do is use, if you guys have seen those like payday advance places, like check into cash, if you remember those old commercials, that's sort of how they manage their money. That becomes a de facto bank for them. But postal savings bank would get perhaps more money into economic circulation. That's the argument. They called for a graduated income tax, so the more money you make, the more you pay. They wanted to see currency inflated. They wanted inflation, which normally we think of inflation as a bad word, but for populists, if currency was inflated, it would mean that the money that they had in their pocket would increase. And they called for a remonetization of silver, which we will be discussing. And again, a remonetization of silver would lead to an inflated currency. This is a great political cartoon referencing the People's Party, and you can see how the Populist Party is really made up of a whole bunch of different types of political groups. This cartoon is kind of a dig at that. It says a party of patches. And then, I don't know who's selling this little zipper pouch. I guess it's kind of cute, but I just thought that you could really see the different names of political parties here. The Knights of Labor, Socialists, People's Party, kind of being put over all of that. Even the Farmers Alliance, Old Greenback Party. The Depression of 1893 begins as a panic. It is the worst economic crisis the nation has ever seen. It begins with the Reading Railroad in Pennsylvania declares bankruptcy. It drives home just how interconnected our economy is, especially when it comes to the railroads. It actually starts as a crisis overseas that eventually impacts the railroads. And once it impacts a railroad company here and leads to bankruptcy, there is this massive economic domino effect that happens. And within 6 months in 1893, more than 8,000 businesses fail, 156 railroads fail, 400 banks fail. Agricultural prices, which were already low, drop even further. 20% of the country is unemployed. And there is no true recovery until 1901. And remember, there's no bottom here. There's nothing that the government is putting into place in terms of unemployment benefits or closing the markets or anything like that. So once things start falling, once banks start failing, they do not stop. Things get so bad that in 1894, a man named Jacob Coxey leads a, quote, army. It's called Coxey's Army of unemployed men to Washington, D.C. They demand jobs, and they demand that the government create, very interestingly, that the government create a public works program, which had been floated before by Grover Cleveland, but never initiated. Coxey will ultimately be arrested. He actually gets arrested for walking on the grass at the Capitol, and the army will disperse. The Populist Party at this point is going to start to be labeled as socialist, and people tend to turn away from it. And I want us to take a look at this political cartoon. There's a wolf or creepy-looking dog labeled as Hard Times, 1893. Uncle Sam has a gun. He's going to put him down. It says Business Revival. And the caption says, another hide to be taken. And the little small print there says something along the lines of, every 20 years you come knocking on our door, it's not going to end well for you because I know exactly which weapon to use. And if you look in the background, you see Lady Liberty or whoever she's supposed to be, right? Republican motherhood, perhaps. She also has a gun, but she has skins, right? Hard Times of 1873, Hard Times of 1857. So it is about every 20 years, and what they will do is the government will revive business, focus on industry, and then that usually will put an end to these hard times. I want to take a quick pause here, and then I'm going to do a separate conversation about the silver question.